Internet. I am Chris Reynolds, Senior Developer Advocate at Pantheon, and today on the stream, we're going to be talking about accessibility. Uh, Specifically, ensuring that your site is accessible in WordPress with the Gutenberg block editor. And as a bit of history, when Gutenberg was first merged into WordPress core, there's a lot of valid criticisms thrown at it from accessibility experts around the world about both the accessibility of the block editor interface itself, the stuff that's in the admin, and also the markup that it creates. The truth is that it's very easy to have a fully accessible site from like a markup and code perspective, and then break it all by not knowing how to ensure that the blocks you are adding to your posts and pages are properly accessible. And here to walk us through that is Mr. Troy Chaplin. Hi, Troy. Welcome to the stream.
Hey, Chris. Thanks for having me. How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good. So you basically ran into this firsthand with your work at Carleton University, right? So tell us about the realization that you needed to build a tool to check Gutenberg block accessibility in your work at the university.
Well, as I was diving more into using Gutenberg and getting myself familiar with the Gutenberg editor before we started building everything at the university, I started to kind of notice there were opportunities to publish content that was not accessible, such as like the button. If you were missing text, you could easily publish it. I made several attempts at modifying the table block through a variation or trying to remove the ability to remove the header row from the table. And I just found that I was unsuccessful in some of those ways. And I set about trying to build a tool that would allow me to control some of that content publishing at the university, but to also build something that was more accessible or more readily available to the general public and the WordPress users that are out there who also wanted to start preventing accessibility issues on their site by live editing, or sorry, by catching all those errors as you live edit in WordPress itself. Maybe about 6-8 months before WordCamp Canada 2024, I had saw a video from Ryan Welcher. He was talking about how you could use the post locking features that were built into WordPress core.
Hmm.
Video, I kind of had an idea on how can I create a system that would validate attributes in the blocks and then lock posts from being published until those issues were resolved. So for the next, I think, year off and on, I started building these tools and learning more around some of the functionality that was available in core, and then understanding how the block editor worked. In the end, I built a system that not only validates block attributes. I recently added the ability to validate post meta, as well as other general elements within the post editor, such as the page title or the post title, so we can make it so folks are required to add a page title before they publish.
So, I mean, maybe it's obvious to some folks out there, but for anyone who for everyone, like obviously there are specific requirements for a website to be accessibility if you're accessible if you're making a website for a university, for example, or for a government institution. But why should people care?
I think even if you look beyond some of the WCAG requirements, like for us, I work at a university in Canada, so we have to adhere to WCAG 2.0, I think double A standards right now. I don't recall exactly when triple A are coming into effect. But part of that, to me, it's also about making sure the content is accessible for everyone. Like I don't like to just look at the idea that here's a bunch of rules, we have to follow them because the government says so. For example, one of those ones is all caps on text. Technically not an accessibility error, but that's also a barrier for folks with dyslexia when they're trying to read on the web. So, I like to avoid doing a lot of those things. Or I try to find like other little ways where you can do a little bit more that goes beyond the scope, and make sure that we're providing content that's accessible to everyone, to the best of our abilities. And I think everybody in the world deserves to come to a website and know that the content that they're getting, they can consume no matter how they have to go about consuming it.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, and I mean, if you listen to the podcast that I have that is unrelated to this live stream, I've had a couple folks on, and we've talked about exactly this. Like, it's they're needing to have things made accessible to you is not a permanent thing, right? Not everyone like the ability the idea of like a disabled person or a person with a disability, like everybody has disabilities at different times and in different shapes and in different contexts, and like it's a much broader thing than just assuming, oh, like giving somebody a label and then building a site to fix the label. Because like if I'm looking at my phone and there's like it's full sun on my phone, then my vision is impaired because I have a reflection on the phone, right? Like that's a temporary disability, and websites need to also be readable to people that are looking at their phone at 12 o'clock noon, right? Um, but we've been talking for a while. Let's bring up your screen, and I'd like you to show me, walk me through what we're looking at, and what the solution that you have developed really does.
Okay, first, I guess I should show this page here. So this is the Block Accessibility Checks site that I've developed as a part of it. It contains a lot of information for users on how you can leverage it on your site, a lot of documentation for developers on how they can leverage it with their external block plugins and leverage the API that's built into the Block Accessibility Checks. Um, so how that works is we do have the plugin activated here. So it adds a menu item here for the accessibility and validation. You can see here there are three main areas. So the first one is core blocks. So as part of the core blocks, you can validate buttons, there's images, there is alt text on images, there's tables, there's headings, a couple different options for headings. So what you can see on the options page is a list of blocks that are in here, and I'm adding more and more of these over time as I investigate new blocks, or someone points out an issue and I'll go and investigate it, and then the list of blocks will show up here in this column. The plugin categorizes, so there's two basic categories of validations in this plugin, and they're all accessible by external block plugin developers as well. So you can deem your validation to be an accessibility requirement, or you can deem it to be a validation. So you can come down here and see I have the heading set as a validation. So this option here just lets you remove specific heading levels from the editor if you don't want to use them in your overall site design. But all the other ones are accessibility, like tables are required to use a header row. So this is under the accessibility category. What you can see in the priority levels is, so at the university, we're heavy-handed. We're required to meet certain requirements, and there are potential fines that come about with these errors and issues. So we're pretty heavy-handed. But for the general public, this plugin, I didn't want it to be forced. I wanted users to make their choice, or a developer to be able to pick what they want to do. So when you first set up the plugin, everything by default is set to error. As you can see here, I've gone through for the purpose of this demo, and I've configured this so we can see the variety of messaging and how that works in the editor here in a moment. But you can go down through, you can pick whether you want it to be an error, which then will block your publishing. You can make it a warning, which will still allow publishing, but you'll get a notice about the issue in the editor. Or you can just turn it off entirely if you don't want to be bothered by it. Or say if you're migrating a site and you just want to kind of get through things quickly to hand it over to a client for you while you go and do all the fine tuning, you can turn these things off as well. And then over here, one of the more recent releases that I did on this, I tackled the difference between validation site editor versus validation the content editor. This is a big blocker because I also had to learn a lot more in depth about block themes as well. So I figured out what the differences were there. So now what I've enabled is the ability to turn off any of these validations. So if you're making a template or a pattern that you're going to have a button on there, but you're not going to put a link on there, you can bypass all of that and still publish and store those patterns. The other option we have in the plugin by default is editor validations. One of the things that's always kind of bugged me over the years is the ability for customers or users to be able to create content that doesn't have a page title, and the impact that has on SEO as well. So in the release I did earlier this year, I added the ability to validate the post and the page titles. And there's also a simple approach where an external developer, say if you're making a custom post type, you can also add your custom post type here and make your title required quite easily too. The third option we have is an example of an external block that I've created to demo the integration that external developers have with the plugin. So if you come here, you'll see that I'm validating some blocks. So I do have a card grid and a card block here that has some validation to it. I have added some post meta validation to the post type. And then I also have some additional editor validation. So here I have a couple of unique ones, probably something I wouldn't always do, like limit the paragraph blocks to encounter brevity. So it's just an example of things that you can do that kind of go outside of the block attribute scope or the post meta scope and validate additional things within the site editor. Let's take a look at how some of these work though. So if I'm coming in and I'm editing my page, put a button on the page, I put it in, and right away, based on my settings, I know that I require, I think it's a link and a text is what I've chosen. If I flip back, I can take a quick look. I'm requiring a link and I'm requiring my text as a warning. What you can see here is we have this little indicator that shows up next to your block. So it's not too in your face, but it's really noticeable for folks so they get an idea that there's an issue here with this block. You can click on it, you get your little over, and it tells you exactly what those issues are with that block. Alternatively, if you're building up a lot of issues or if you're migrating a site and you're reviewing content from someone else and there's a lot of issues on the page, we do have this plugin sidebar. And we'll come back to this. We'll create a bunch of accessibility errors and we'll show how this builds up over time as you're working on content. So I'm just going to go and I will quickly add another button in here. And then underneath here, I'm going to add, going to put in a table as well. So we can just put in our table and you can see here that we're not requiring a header row here. So right away we're saying, well, this is an accessibility issue because tables require headers. An image has a decent amount of checks. I do believe I have an image uploaded. Oh, I thought I did. That. Okay, so I'm going to put that in and you can see right away that we do have another accessibility issue because we don't have an alt tag on this image. As far as images go, there's several different things we can do with images here. In some cases, there are decorative images that don't always require an alt tag. So I have added an option here that allows a user to define this as a decorative image, and then it will bypass the accessibility checks. Otherwise, if you select it, you can see, excuse me, that we do require an alt text on this image. So example of the media upload. So you can see now my error has gone away because I've added an alt text. One other aspect of images is the caption. So if I have a caption, oh, something weird just happened there. I think something got duplicated a whole bunch. Let me add that image back in here. Okay, so we'll add that. I think I hit Command D as opposed to Command V when I was trying to paste that. It's duplicate in the block editor. Okay, so we can see if you come in here and no, there's a bug somewhere. I'm hitting Command V and it's duplicating.
Live demos, huh?
Interesting bug. All right, let me try this again. I will put this image back on the page, and instead of pasting, I will just type. Oh no, the caption seemed to have duplicated my image. That is interesting. So what I was supposed to be showing here is it captions and alt text can't be the same. That's also an error. And there's also some code running here in behind the scenes that should, yeah, okay, so there's a warning here. So alt text should be less than 120 5 characters as well. So those are a couple of the issues that exist on images. And the other one that we have are the headings. So we can see now we have all of the headings in here. But if I were to go and I'll turn off the H1 and we can save that. And once I refresh, I'm actually just going to copy everything because I want to show the sidebar after. So if I refresh this page and paste in what I had previously, and I go to add a header, you can see there's no more H1 on the page. So it allows you to remove that. There's also some stuff in here if I want to create a hierarchy of headings. So for accessibility, you want to make sure that you're ordering your headings in a proper order. So you should go H1 to H2, and then you can go back to H2, H3. Here, if I go H4 before I go to before I go to H3, that's also going to be a warning too.
Yep.
So checking the order of the headings that are on the page and making sure that they're structurally correct. So it's kind of a replication of like, I really love this outline that we have here in Core that shows you this. And I just wish this were more present and more predominant for the end user so they have a better idea that this is something that they're doing that's a really simple change and something that they can do really quickly. So I'm kind of just trying to do that right here as well. So that's sort of what you get on the page. So you get a lot of live editing going on here with these 4 main blocks, and I'm adding more over time. One of the other things I really liked was this sidebar thing. I wanted an area where you could get a top-down view of all of the issues on your page. And I kind of looked at there's a lot of influence out there. Like I know Ryan Welcher does something really similar with his AQL plugin that I really liked how he formulated the sidebar. I see a lot of stuff that like Mike McAllister is doing with Ollie, and I talked about the plugin and got some feedback, and kind of came up with some new ideas based on some conversations with some folks in the community. So what I did here was put together this one sidebar to show everything in one shot. So what you see is, you get your tables. It'll show you what the problem is with the table. It'll tell you how many buttons are. So I went back and I added an incrementer there. So as having 5 errors showing, I showed 2 errors. And then with the heading, and then you separate it by warnings as well. So what happens is you see this is highlighted in red to indicate that there are errors and you can't publish your page. And then here you can actually click on each of these and it'll bring your cursor right to where you need to be to go and start to fix some of your issues. So I'm just going to put in some, again, these are not good things I'm doing right now, but for the sake of quickness. So I fixed that error. If I come back to the table and we're going to add the header, and I do want to add a requirement that text should be in that because people can still publish it without text, which again is not really solving the problem here. And then I come back, we come into the heading. So let's change you over to an H3 and fix that problem. So now you'll see that this has changed to a warning color. And now I can actually save my page. So I fixed all of the required accessibility. So I can go ahead, I can save my page, I can move on to my next task, and I can come back later if I want to go ahead and start working through the fixes on the warnings.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you have to, like, you can't actually publish a page that has problems. Like, you're disallowed from being able to publish a page for problems. I've seen a couple things in the past that hook into a similar sort of like validation kind of step in the editorial workflow sort of process. I think that, um, there's editorial comments, I believe, coming into WordPress core in 7.0, I believe, where the ability to like comment on parts of a post or page, and like be able to like go between different editors. I think that'll be a very useful thing to like that would integrate with this really well, right? Like, you could be, if you have like a couple different people working on a page and you've got some accessibility issues, but like, for example, you don't know what the alt text for that image should be. You can leave a comment for somebody else and say, hey, what should we put here, so that we can get this thing
Yes.
validated.
I even like that in sort of the context of the notes right now. Like if I'm
Yeah.
someone that's kind of working on things, or if I'm just like, if I'm helping someone with a migration, but it's not clear to me what I should do, you can make those notes and you can leave that comment for, whoever you're working with, and start getting that feedback. So I like the idea of using the notes in conjunction with some of the accessibility stuff to start collaborating on the content here.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome.
All right, so that's sort of the overview of what I'm doing with this plugin as far as like some of the core blocks go. One of the other things that I did add, and I think I added this late, I think I can't remember if it was late in 2025 or if it was in my January 1st release, but I really wanted to sort of expand the plugin to validate post meta and other things in the block editor, like the headers and post titles and stuff like that. So I created a post type. This is part of the demo plugin that we looked at in the settings earlier. So I created a post type called bands, and I'm just going to add a new band, and I'm going to call it the Reynolds. And then we'll say, about the band. So we got your content in here. Now, I do have a card grid created. So this would be like your discography, your albums. I'm going to create a little group of cards that, represent you as an artist. So we'll have like, your first album, and you can see that these are changes. So we'll take a look at what these errors are. So if you open up our little sidebar, we can see that the album card it requires a title. And then we have some meta errors. So we do have a city of origin is required. And then we have some other warnings. So let's look at how we go about fixing these. So much like we just looked at in the content area for just the core blocks, you can click on the album card and you give it, your album title here again. And then you can click here, you can see what our other issues are. So in this case, I have a date field here. So what was your release date on your album? You can just pick some arbitrary, oh, I didn't hit OK on that one, set the date. And we can see that goes away. And then we have the ability to add a description for your album or whatever else you would like to do to represent your music. So now for the meta errors, you can see here, I've created a plugin sidebar for this post type. And you can see as you go in here, it's real simple. Just try to be really, really clean and not too over the top here, and indicate what were required fields. So in this case, your city of origin is required. So you're in Utah. I don't know exactly where, but I'm just going to leave it at Utah. And then we don't really need the record label because those are just their warnings. They're not required fields. But now you can see we can go ahead and publish your first post as, to promote your band. So there's your post validation happening in the plugin sidebar. This will work in I think it's called the document sidebar. I can't remember if that's correct, but it would be where you get your widget over in this side of it. So it'll work in both of those locations.
I kind of want this plugin.
Well,
like the band plugin. I kind of want that one also.
hey, that's free and open source, and it's actually linked up in the documentation. So if anybody does want to go and play around with it, I did create this as an example for those that wanted to explore how they can build their own blocks and integrate it in their own work. It was a perfect example of the code in play that people could look at as well, in addition to the documentation. Like, for me personally, like, I like to look at the documentation. It's important, but if I can find an example of something that functions, I like that, because then I can get in there, I can play with it, and I can change things, and I can understand how it works.
Adam agrees with me. He also wants the
I
we
guess,
didn't come here to demo this. We came here to demo the accessibility stuff.
but the nice thing is if you're using the block accessibilities check plugin, you can do all of this and so much more with all of your things. So one other thing I do want to show is if we do have additional paragraphs, you can see that the warning now has come up here. So you can see that we've exceeded the maximum amount of paragraphs that we've allowed in the editor in general, which was one of the options I would not really have to put there, but I was trying to come up with some ideas just to give real simple examples of what you can do with external plugins. So that's sort of the functionality of the plugin and what we're able to do. So just really quickly, I want to dive in just really quick into the documentation, just so if there's other folks out there who are interested in giving this a shot or integrating some of their block plugins into this validation. Um, it's really simple. There's three ways that it uses a block validation, there's post meta validation, and then there's editor validation. All three of them. One of the big things I did in early January with the latest release was realign all of the configuration. There was lots of breaking changes that I did here because I was approaching things differently for all three of these use cases, but I wanted to make them very consistent. So I took an approach where you register your checks or validations in PHP, then your JavaScript gets on queued, and that's what handles the validation, whether it be in the post meta or live in the editor. Those are basically the two steps. So if you go down through the documentation, you'll see that there's a register of the checks, and they're pretty simple. It's just part of the block registration. You can throw in an array here. I had some conversations with some folks at WordCamp Canada this past year around maybe putting this in the block.json, and I do like that approach. I'm just not sure if that's a better approach than having consistency across all three types of validation here. One thing that we can do, and I do want to point this out for developers, is that you do get this type. So this relates to the category. So as a developer, if you want to force your block attribute title, for example, to always be an error, you can set type of error. It'll never show up in the options page. It'll always be an error. Users can't do anything about it. So you can still be very heavy-handed as an external developer with this plugin. By putting settings as your type, that's actually what will automatically integrate it. This will get built for you automatically. It will take the name of your plugin and put it here and use it as the page name, and it will start to pull all of this information out just from this information here. Then you'll see the JavaScript validation. It's very simple if you want it to be, or you can get really complex. Really, this is conditional logic 101 for the most of this. So again, I think it's really simple for any developer to kind of quickly get up there and check, hey, is this field filled out? No, then block your publishing. And then obviously the last step in all of these is on queuing the scripts. If I take a quick look at the post meta validation, this one's slightly different. You're still doing your validation in PHP, but I'm actually hooking into the validate callback function within the register post meta to kind of just avoid having additional functions. I was really wanting to put it into something that was already supported by core. That just made it a bit easier for people to add it to something they already have or start building it moving forward. And then again, you're going to validate with your JavaScript and then on-queue your JavaScript. And then very similar with the editor, you're going to register an editor check. You're going to put this is the exact same as what you would for a block. You're just checking editor versus block attributes. And then your validation via JavaScript and then on-queue JavaScript. So those
are there plugins? I know you've been sort of like talking to a lot of folks around the community about things to bring into this and also like what you could do with this. Are there plugins that you know of that are currently sort of actively supporting the accessibility checker?
Not that I'm aware of. I know I've had a lot of conversations with folks, and there was a few I guess few folks that I know that work within companies. So not like companies themselves haven't approached me, but like folks that I know that work within those companies have said like, hey, like we're looking at this for these client groups and stuff like that. So maybe there are folks out there that's doing it. I mean, maybe this live stream that we're doing here today will show folks that there is this consistent tool that is really easy to use that maybe they would like to leverage for their work. At the end of the day, my goal on this one now is moving forward is I would like to propose this as a validation API in core of WordPress. And I'm sort of building towards that. And that's been a lot of my conversations in recent months around this. And, if this happens to be something that's of interest to the community and the folks that are, maintaining a lot of that stuff in core, then awesome. If it comes in like this, great. If it's a version of this, that's great. At the end of the day, I really feel strongly that WordPress is lacking a consistent way to validate data. I mean, I look at other plugins that do, like, I'm a big fan of ACF Pro. I used it for many years. Validation was one of the reasons why I kept going back to it. But now I can kind of go back into the post meta and not have to add another plugin when I can sort of do some of these things myself. So I would love to see something like this become more of a consistent tool for the community.
Yeah, for sure. We do have a question in from the chat. Can you add headings from custom blocks into the heading validations? Those custom block headings usually don't show up in the document outline.
As far as the hierarchy goes, that's a good question. If you're talking like, so if you have the card block, for example, the card grid that I showed for the band discography, the headings in there, in that block, I believe I have, yes, I do have an option that I can specify what it is. I would have to go back and test that to see, and if not, I'm going to add that as a feature request to add to my plugin for sure, because I think that's a great idea. One of the things, and I didn't actually mention this, that there was a way the validation does run on inner blocks. I just don't know if it checks the hierarchy of headings correctly. But it does run on inner blocks. So if I do specify that that the buttons require a link, if you've got a button that's inside of another custom, so if you have a custom block that then leverages the core button block, that core button block will still continue to be validated because the functionality does take into consideration inner block usage.
So, taking it sort of full circle, like we talked at the top, like you were running into this particularly because you had a distinct and specific need to check accessibility, to validate accessibility, to validate that your content was accessible within the context of a university website. How are you using it at on the Carleton University site? Like what sorts of things, like how much of it is hard coded, how much of the rules are forced as opposed to options, how much like of the custom code, the custom blocks are using the hooks, like what, walk us through sort of your development workflow as somebody who's working on a site that uses blocks.
So we're heavy-handed. Like, we don't have this, the options page doesn't exist. Currently, right now, like the way this development worked is that I started building both of these things almost simultaneously, actually, because we had a very different need, and I didn't have a clear vision of what I wanted to do with the plugin at the time I started building it. I just had an idea, and I said I'm gonna just start to roll with it. So at the university, we have everything that's hot because it's sort of integrated into our custom block plugin. We're doing a lot of a lot of the validations you see here are validations that we do have at the university. They're all errors by default. We do have, I think we have almost 70 blocks at this point, and if there's anything in those blocks that do require validation, we have that validation in place. So we do have a pretty large base of JavaScript validations going on across a significant amount of blocks now. I'm actually now starting to work on converting some of that stuff over to using this plugin now, because we don't really need to maintain it at the university. If this plugin is now doing more than what we were doing at the university, then it also reduces the amount of JavaScript we have to manage and maintain and stuff like, so the long-term approach will be better for us to switch over to this plugin. So it's happening, just needs some more time to kind of get there.
So in that context, like in the case of you are a site owner, a lead developer for a site that is like a university site, and you want to be heavy-handed and you don't want to have the options page, is there an option within the plugin to like basically disable this screen that we're looking at right now?
That's actually a good idea. I never thought, I should have thought about that. So I'm gonna actually add that in. I also wonder too, because I think, I mean, I guess it depends on how your users, what role your users play. Because I'm pretty sure like this is not available to the editor role because you need to be an admin to get into some of these options pages. So I guess if if you're running enterprise and you have a couple hundred users, they're probably editors, so they wouldn't have access. You would probably already have a designated admin for the site, or a team that act as admins for all of the sites that would control that. But I do like that option for companies that might have more admins that they don't want to have um, access to being able to change some of these options. So it's a great.
Yeah, or even just like, you know what set of rules, you know what your requirements, what requirements you want to have. You don't, you're probably never going to change them, like one and done, like set it and forget it. Nobody even has the possibility of changing it in the future. Yeah.
Yeah, I like it because you can do that right now with your custom blocks. So with your custom
Right.
blocks, you get exactly what you want to do. So I can see something potentially like a simple little array of types. So you can specify any of these. So like maybe I can output a list of what all of these are, and then an external developer can say, well, I want this to always be a warning, and go from there.
I'm also wondering too, like in the context of potentially pulling in this API or a derivative API into WordPress core. I know that Matt has in the past said decisions not options, and probably I'm imagining like a very detailed new options page coming out of nowhere in WordPress core might be kind of a bit of a hard sell. But if there is an API to sort of turn that on or off, then that could be a little bit of an easier pitch.
Yeah, the approach I actually thought about as far as like because I'm thinking about that a lot lately because I've been writing the proposal that I want to put up in the discussions area within the Gutenberg repo. So my thought on that was to not bring in these core validations, to leave that with an external plugin, even unless there was an appetite for that. I think for me the big one is the consistency in approaches to how you validate attributes and all of those other things. And if that were there, then anybody can go and leverage that, but not be forced into this sort of setting screen unless you wanted to do that. And maybe the quick flag or filter or hook or whatever to turn it on could be a great idea if there was an appetite for building this out as an options page. But I do see this being valuable as a standalone plugin that would interact with any future variation of what this might look like if it were something that goes into core.
Currently, the specific checks I imagine that you have here are pretty, like, you as a human being, the maintainer of this plugin, need to know the accessibility rules and violations that you're then needing to check on. So, like, I guess I'm wondering about, like, in the future, like what the sustainability of like the API. Well, I guess the API is irrelevant because it's mostly about how you would interface with the things. But the specific checks, I guess, is like, in order to, when new things come along, when there's a new standard like proposed or declared, like, a human being, in this case you, the maintainer of this plugin, needs to be aware of like what things have changed to be able to implement it in here. Is that my correct in making that assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know of any way that there's some automation around some of that stuff, and it's also part of the thinking around like the validation API as a part of core, but this stays as a standalone plugin. 'Cause
Right.
as these things change, then you're relying on the contributors who are already busy with a ton of other stuff and a lot of great initiatives that are coming forth in new versions of WordPress now, versus like you know me catching on to a new rule or a change in a rule that then I can get a release out the door in like a day or two depending on my availability. So I do like the idea of keeping that as a sort of a standalone thing for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
um well, what do you think? So besides pulling it into core, do you have other thoughts of things that where you want to see the plugin go or evolve into, or what sorts of things uh would you
Mhm.
like to see in the future?
Well, one of the things I was talking to someone the other day about this, and I think you almost alluded to it just now, and I thought you were kind of segueing towards this a little bit. The education of users. So, like when something happens, or you might be a content person that doesn't really understand the rules, and you're like, well, why can't I publish that image? And like, maybe this doesn't give you enough information, or maybe you're someone that's just wants that knowledge. I would love to be able to find a way just to add a link that gets to a piece of documentation that's actually understandable. Like if you've read any of the WCAG documentation, sometimes it's really hard for an average person to understand it. There's times where I don't understand it. Like it's not always the most straightforward. I would love to have an area where I could provide additional information, because I do like the fact that we're providing a way for folks to prevent some of these errors. But I think the understanding and the education around this, it's a hard one, but I also feel it's a really important one that as people start to work more and more with these tools, the understanding of the do's and don'ts, once they become a bit more ingrained in your thinking, I feel your workflow just improves because you don't have to stop and fix some of these things because you're immediately starting to build your content accessibly. And I think that's a big benefit to anybody who's creating content.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that there's a lot of nuance in implementation of making things accessible in like terms of like under like there's the rule, there's the guideline, right? But then there's nuance there about how like the context in which that works. Like a good example is, if an image is decorative, then the requirement for alt text is not necessarily like required because it's not showing a thing that a screen reader needs to report back on. And in fact, it would be distracting to a non-sighted user if you started describing like a whirligig or something that was just there for decoration. Um,
Mhm.
and if you're just doing an accessibility review on a site to tick the boxes, there are a lot of things where uh, the nuance is lost because you're just ticking the boxes, right?
Right. So there was an error. I had it functional, but I think I need to look at. I might have created a bug when I was fixing something the other day. Um, there was a suggestion. Joe Dolson had kind of reached out and gave me a couple suggestions, which was fantastic. And he was the one that pointed out. I think it was the fact that a alt tag can't match the caption.
Mm.
I think he pointed out the 125 character limit. And then we talked a little bit around the alt text itself. Like you can't just put the word image. Okay, there's my warning. So you can't just put the word image. You can't cheat. Like you need to properly describe it. So, while the system's not smart enough to understand, that maybe I'm not describing the image the way I should be, it at least checks to make sure that I can't say this is an image or this is a photo or picture of. I can't do picture of something. Like that's not a good description. So we have those things in place too.
It's in 2026 and everybody's all hyped up about Claude Code and AI, and AI is getting pulled into WordPress core, and it's already in Drupal core. Um, what sorts of what sorts of opportunities do you think uh, combining the validation API with like AI based tools do you see as like in the potential horizon?
Hmm. I haven't really thought about that one. I mean, first thing that comes to mind is more automation around how to fix them or even fixing them for you at a larger scale. So if you have a site that you migrate in that has 400 pages of content and 300 of those have accessibility issues, that's a lot of work. So even like one of the features I do want to do on this plugin is not only have just this sidebar, I want to have like a dedicated page in the options page where it shows you a list of all the pages that have accessibility issues, like a nice data table of stuff. And I'm actually kind of excited to start diving into the data view stuff to see how I can leverage that and learn how that works. But maybe some of that stuff could be also grabbed by AI once you compile everything, and then AI can go through and be like, "Oh, that should be an H3, not an H4. I'm going to change it for you really quickly," and maybe then generate a report of like, "Well, here's something that you just got to quickly check," as opposed to go and manually edit just to verify that all the issues were fixed. Maybe that could be something that would be helpful for large scale sites, especially like I think about large enterprise sites or enterprise builds that have like hundreds of sites that might have to do, hundreds of hours of work to address accessibility issues. Like, how do they do that, and what's the fastest way to do it?
Does is the are the validations stored anywhere? Is there like a central sort of like data store of where those things are? Because I'm thinking like I'm got my programmer brain on, like I'm thinking like a WPCLI command that could like scan through like everything that was recorded across the entire site, and then an AI could then see, oh, I see these issues and I see the pages that are cross-linked to them, and I can, yeah, go in and just change everything in one go.
Not yet, but there is a plan to build a data store that would store all of that stuff. And I mean, I can't think of a better, more efficient way to present a larger data table of where all of those options are. And it could be a pretty heavy database query. You don't want to do any of that stuff. So there's got to be a fast, efficient way to do that that's not cumbersome on the database. So
Yeah. Yeah. Well, very cool. Thank you for showing us, walking us through this plugin. I know we showed it at the top, but where can people learn more about the accessibility checker?
I would go to blockaccessibilitiescheck.com. All of the documentation is here. I maintain all the documentation there. You can go and click this download button to download the plugin. And other than that, if you do want to report an issue, I guess I can share the GitHub link, but you can just find me, Troy Chaplin, at GitHub, and you'll find the Block Accessibilities repo there. That's where I would suggest reporting any issues or any errors. And I add my own work there as well. So if you're ever curious about what I'm working on or what's coming up with this plugin, you can always check there as well.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on, Troy. Thank you, everyone who are watch live or watching in the future, time traveling, and yeah, definitely check out this plugin. I use it. I started using it on my podcast site. I'm starting to use it more. Like I said, I want to steal your plugin so that I can use that and then use the block accessibility checker on my actual music stuff that I have on my website. So yeah, for sure. Thanks again, and for everyone watching, we'll see you all on the internet.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris.